What up, guys? The Bench Buddies are back with our college basketball week 4 top 25. As always, I have Ty joining me here in this week's video. But before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Gets to 200 subscribers, we'll be doing an autograph item giveaway. All you have to do is just hit that subscribe button to be entered in. But before we get into the top 25, we got Michigan State and UNC dropping from the rankings. And then obviously we have the others receiving votes as well. But out of Michigan State and the five you see pictured here, Ty, which one kind of could get back into the rankings here this week or possibly later in the year?
I think Arizona State and Virginia Tech. I'll start with Arizona State. They lost their first game of the year. It was a bad loss to Texas Southern, but they haven't lost since. Obviously, as a Michigan fan, I saw them absolutely dominate Michigan. So they can shoot. They're just very hot and cold, but I think they're a dangerous team.
I mean, obviously, I got to talk about North Carolina in their recent struggles. They were the preseason #1 in the AP, not our ranking. We kind of had it, but we had Kentucky, so it's not the best right now. But UNC, they're gonna get back in eventually. It's just a matter of when. They got a lot of new pieces, moving parts. The Brady Manick role is the big key for them because he was pretty much the gel for that team last year. But once they get that figured out, come ACC play, probably the new year, I expect North Carolina to jump back in. But at 25, jumping into the rankings, we do have Iowa, and they got a tough week ahead of them. Two ranked matchups in your first Big Ten conference game, not looking too promising for these Hawkeyes. You never know. If they go 2-1 here, it doesn't matter in which order. I think they still will be ranked this week. It's always tough to win in Cameron indoor, and if they get that win, then why can't they win the next two? Just because that's kind of a big culture win, I think, for a program as well. And it would win over those guys too. But their only loss is to TCU, which you'll see coming up in the rankings. It seems like every year Iowa's right around the 30s to 20 ranking kind of the whole year. And you might see them make a run here in March if they can keep up this kind of play.
And 24, we have TCU. I think a lot of people forgot about them. Obviously, took a very bad loss early, but they haven't lost since then, similar to Arizona State. They kind of just fell off the map, and now here they are, 6-1. As you just said, they have that win over Iowa, which is turning out to be a really good win. So if they can go on the road and beat SMU this week, I think they're going to be on their way right back to where they started, which was as a top 15 team. And I think they're really dangerous. They returned a lot of talent from last year. So I think a lot of people that wrote them off are going to be regretting that.
23, we got Ohio State moving up. And this is more just in part to them winning last week, but they did lose to Duke, obviously. And that was a good game until late. They just couldn't claw all their way back into it. But I think the key factor for them is going to be Zed Key. If he can get more involved on the glass, I know he's averaging 8 rebounds a game right now. But if he can get a few more offensive rebounds, I think that's going to be pivotal come Big Ten play. And obviously this week they start Big Ten play. And if they really want to compete, they're going to have to go against Purdue, more than likely the heavy favorites right now in the Big Ten. And obviously they got Edey. So they're going to have to find some way to get more rebounds and production down low.
At 22, we have San Diego State, a team that seems to be ranked all year and every year. They just live in the rankings, one of the most consistent programs in the country at this point. A 3-point win over UC Irvine, but that's a team who has a win over Oregon already. So that's, not the pushover that people would think. But a tough week here. Troy is a pretty good team. I think they played yesterday, maybe today, but that's a solid team. And
Yeah,
then
they
they
won
go
by
to St.
5.
Mary's, 1-5. So they're kind of winning close, but that's usually what they do. They're not usually a team that blows teams out. So we'll learn more about them when they take on St. Mary's.
21, we got Creighton, and this was a very tough week for them last week. Lost at Texas, which obviously Texas is very good this year, and then a very questionable home loss to Nebraska. And, obviously us being Big Ten guys, that's a very bad loss for this Blue Jays team, which could come back and haunt them later in the year if, somehow, some way this team finds himself on a bubble. But I don't think that's going to happen. It's early in the year. As long as Nemhard is healthy, we saw what he was last year before he got hurt. And if he can stay healthy and Kalkbrenner can be the absolute beast that we think he's going to be, it's going to be a tough test to slow down Creighton in the Big East.
All right, Iowa State jumping up 3 spots to number 20. Similar to last year, they had no expectations, players transferred out. And once again, they're a really good team. One of the most underrated coaches in the country, and TJ Otzelberger. He's done a great job in his 2 years already. We talked about it all year last year. They won 2 games in the COVID year, made the tourney last year, and now they're ranked again. This week they go to Iowa for a rivalry game. If they can get that win, they're going to be a tough out, I think, in the Big 12. Obviously, that league is loaded, but Iowa State's going to be right there. And I think a lot of people are going to start taking notice.
At 19, we got UCLA moving up. They started strong last week with 2 wins over Pac-12 opponents. So obviously that's a good sign there because always the first one is the hardest when it comes to conference play. But this week should be a very easy week against Denver. And then they face Maryland and Kentucky in the same week. So next week is going to be a pivotal week for the Bruins. But as long as Jaquez and Clark can have very solid games, at least 20 and 15, that puts them on track to compete with a lot of top teams. And this Bruin team, had a lot of expectations last year, didn't really live up to them. And I think now they're kind of more realistic expectations. And I think that's when they could shatter through those. So if you're kind of looking for a dark horse team that might be getting a little bit underlooked, I think you want to look here at the Bruins just because they are playing in the Pac-12 and it's not as loaded as it has been in recent years. So these Bruins might get north of 30 wins when it's all said and done.
At 18, we have Kentucky, good bounce back win over Michigan in London. They're showing that they can really shoot the ball. That's been their issue the last few years. If they're losing big games, it's because they're not making enough shots. But this year, they are really turning the tide. Obviously, Oscar Tshiebwe is going to get his, already averaging 14 and 14, basically. So he's just a rebounding machine. And he's actually making shots from outside of the paint this year. His range is expanded quite a bit. So he's going to be dangerous. And I think this team is going to get right back into the top 10, and they'll be a mainstay there throughout the season because there's way too much talent here for them to be ranked where they are.
At 17, we got Gonzaga. They won last night against Kent State by only 7 points at home. Very concerning for Gonzaga early on here. But at the same time, they did beat Michigan State by 1. They lost by 1 to Baylor. But this is the first year they've really had a very tough schedule in the beginning of the year, which I think is going to be very good for them going down the stretch because we've seen it back-to-back Final Four appearances before last year, and they just couldn't get it done, can't win it. And maybe this will be what they need, with 10th year senior Drew Timme, maybe he can finally win a championship. But I think it's going to rely on Julian Strawther. If he can be the guy, when Timme is struggling on some nights and put up 20, 25 when they need it, then I think this Gonzaga team will be just okay because obviously they're playing in the West Coast Conference. Not going to be too much competition there. And if they can, win 18 out of the 20 like they normally do, there's no way this team is going to be lower than a 4 seed.
16, we have Illinois, another really dangerous Illinois team. It seems like that's how they are every year. They're just always inconsistent. And you saw that last week with their road loss to Maryland. Every year, it seems like they can beat anybody in the country, but lose to probably 60 teams. And it seems like this year is no exception. Tonight, last I saw, they were right there with number 2 Texas on a neutral court. But, the next day they could go out and lose that home game to Penn State. You just never know with this team. From what I've seen, nobody's going to want to play them, especially with Terrence Shannon shooting the ball like he has in some of their really big games. If this team gets hot, they are really tough to beat. But you just got to hope you catch them on one of their off nights.
At 15, we got Duke moving up 2 spots. They play Iowa tonight in a very anticipated game for both these teams. And then they should get an easy win against Maryland Eastern. But big stories last week, getting that big home win against Ohio State. Really good for the resume, and I think good for the culture as well. Obviously, John Shire, his first, I would say, big win, you could say, now that he is officially the head coach. But Jeremy Roach is going to be the key player to watch here for Duke. Obviously, the experience he has, he's going to have to be the leader if he likes it or not. He is that guy, and they're going to have to lean on him at some times. And ACC play, obviously, that's a dogfight in itself. So if they really want to exceed expectations that, are kind of already high for this Duke team, Jeremy Roach is going to have to be that guy.
And at 14, we have Indiana. ugly loss to Rutgers. I mean, a team who has had its fair share of good moments over the last few years. Obviously, they've been a tournament team the last 2 years, but that's a bad loss for a team that was coming off that North Carolina win. Looked like they were gonna easily find themselves in the top 10, maybe even close to the top five. But back to the drawing board now. I don't know if it's maybe coming off that high of the big North Carolina win. They kind of came back down to earth, but either way, they need a consistent score outside of TJD because he's not going to go for 25 every night. So somebody else is going to have to step up. Most of the time, it's Xavier Johnson, but he is very hot and cold as a shooter. So somebody's going to have to find their groove for this offense, or they'll have more nights like that Rutgers game.
At 13, Baylor's dropping out of the top 10 as well. They got absolutely murdered on the road to Marquette, but then they come back and respond and beat Gonzaga by 1 point at home. As much as I really wanted to drop them even further, obviously you got to give them credit for a good rebound game, but the ugly loss to Marquette is just too overwhelming to really keep them in the top 10. So we had to move them down here, but I think they're going to rebound fine moving forward. Probably should be at 13 or even higher next week because it's only 1 game week for them against a very bad Tarleton team. If they're anything like they were when I saw them play live last year, then Baylor should probably cream them by at least 30.
And we got Maryland making the big jump this week all the way up to number 12. They have that big win over Illinois now under their belt, and they're 8-0. This is a team that really came out of nowhere. I think a lot of people had them towards the bottom of the Big Ten, but I think it just shows how good of a coach Kevin Willard is because Seton Hall has really struggled this year out of the gates. And now he goes to Maryland, a team who was very bad last year, and they're 8-0, ranked number 12. So I think it's really just the coaching factor for this team. They had talent last year, it just didn't show, but now they're being coached very well. This week they have two very tough road matchups. I think if they can just win one of those, they should stay put or at least barely move down. So either way, it's a very surprising start for Maryland, but it looks like they're on their way back to where they expect to be every year.
Then at 11, another team's fallen out of the top 10. We got Arizona, and they went on the road and lost by 15 to Utah, who's not known for being good at basketball, only football. And it just seems like Arizona had all the momentum. Obviously, Tubelis and Balo, great two combo, good duo for, what kind of game they want to play there out west. But it just seems like they really haven't got the 100% gel yet. And once that clicks, then it could be a whole different story for this Wildcat team. Obviously, last year they exceeded almost every single expectation that they had for them. And now, obviously, the expectations are super higher. So if they can go to Vegas, get that win against Indiana, they will find themselves right back here in the top 10 next week. But it's going to have to come on, I think the bench moving forward. Obviously, the starters are all averaging 12 points or more a game, but after that, the bench is giving them little to no production. So when the bench comes in, they do need to make the most of those minutes.
And into the top 10 this week is Auburn. Yes, they've had some ugly wins, but they've still beat some good teams, and now they're 8-0. So I think you got to give them their props at this point. And it's kind of like last year. They'll have games where their guards just disappear. It's the same two guards as last year, but the defense is getting it done. So even on their off nights, they're still able to get wins so far. And then this week they have a big matchup at Memphis. So I think if they can get through that, that's going to really prove that they're here to stay. And I think they're going to be towards the top of the SEC. Obviously, that's going to be a loaded conference again this year. So they'll have their work cut out for them. But I see them being a really good team if the defense can continue to play like that.
At 9, Tennessee's jumping in to the top 10 as well. And they had 2 blowouts last week, so nothing spectacular. But now we get to really find out what this team's about when they get Maryland on Sunday, which should be an exceptional game. Might be flicking back between football to see what the score is on that one, just because it's a big game for both these teams early in the season. But it's going to come down to Vescovi. Obviously last year he started making a name for himself, SEC tournament and March Madness. And if he can keep it up how he plays, then it's going to be tough to stop this Volunteer team. But they're going to need more production out of bench guys as well, just like Arizona. The starting five can't do it all the time. And, they will struggle at some point in the season, and they're going to have to rely on their bench at some point. And that kind of scares me right now for the Volunteers. So they will have to start getting those guys some more minutes, and hopefully like the East Kentucky game here, get the guys that don't play as much some more minutes, get them more experience moving forward for bigger games.
At number 8, we have Alabama. That speaks for itself. That matchup right there against number 1 Houston. I think that's going to be a huge game for them. And it's a really interesting game. Houston, at their last few games, has been all defense, basically no offense. Alabama just likes to chuck threes. They shoot about 35 threes a game. Difference is this year they're actually making them. Last year they were shooting, I think, below 30% from three as a team, which is alarming for a team that shoots an insane amount of 3-pointers. So this year the guards are playing with a lot more consistency, and it's showing in their 7-1 record. They have a couple really good wins already, including North Carolina. So I think they could go in there and win that game if they're hitting shots, and that's going to be the case with a lot of their games this year. With how many they jack up, are they making shots or are they not?
At 7, Arkansas is jumping into the top 10 as well after a very easy schedule to start the year. They got pretty much easy matchups as well. Besides Oklahoma right now, they play LSU at the end of the month on New Year's Eve. And that's probably their toughest schedule besides this Oklahoma game for the rest of December. So more than likely, this team will stay in the top 10, bearing a very ugly loss or some kind. But Arkansas, you got to like what they're doing. Obviously, Musselman has been a great coach the last 3 years. Ever since COVID year, he has put this team on the map and expect it to stay yet again this year in the SEC to be one of the front runners. And I expect them to, be north of 25, almost 30 wins yet again this year.
And number 6, we have the Kansas Jayhawks. I think a lot of people kind of forgot about them as well. I mean, at least forgot that they're the reigning national champions. Obviously, they had 3 subpar performances in the Bahamas, still won 2 of them, but then pretty much got blown out by Tennessee there. So, I think people are not realizing that this is still an 8-1 team with a win over Duke. So, I mean, there's still a lot of talent on the roster, and they're still a top 10 team as they should be. So, I think if they can get through that Missouri game, which is no pushover, by the way, then they should go into Big 12 play with 1 loss. And I think they should go into it as the favorite again this year, coming back as the national champions.
At 5, we got UConn moving up just 1 spot here, going to Florida, which should be, I think, a very underrated and good game. Just because, going in the swamp is always a tough place to play. But they should destroy Long Island. They're better drinks than they are probably a basketball team. And I think this is your favorite to win the Big East. Before they start Big East play, you got to look at UConn. Somehow, some way, a team that we were obviously sleeping on, didn't even have them getting votes, nothing. Neither of us even thought about this UConn team. And here they are already in the 4th week in our top 5. Shows a lot at how surprised almost everyone in America is right now. And with Villanova struggling without Jay Wright in their first year, Creighton's already shown signs of struggling. This is pretty much UConn's division or conference right now to lose at this point. I know obviously they haven't played any conference games or whatever, but it just seems like all the pieces are starting to fall in line for UConn, and expect them to be 11-0 when they start conference play next week.
At number 4, we have the Purdue Boilermakers, another team who's in the top 5 who was not ranked to start the season, not only by us, but also by pretty much all major polls. And they have just been dominant for the most part. 19-point win over Minnesota to get Big Ten play started. And like I said last week, it's 7'4" Zach Edey, who's averaging 23 and 13, and he's surrounded by a bunch of shooters and really good defenders, and that's why they're really good. Sometimes you don't need a ton of talent. Sometimes it just comes down to one really good big man and a bunch of shooters, and that's exactly what Purdue has, and they play really good defense. So I think I would say right now they got to be the favorite in the Big Ten. I know Illinois is looking really good, but I think it's Purdue's to lose at this point.
At 3, we got Virginia, and they only play 1 game, which is actually going on right now. They're only up 7 at half against James Madison, but no cause for concern there because this Virginia team is playing close games and getting the victory. And I think the win in Ann Arbor really speaks a lot about how good this Virginia team is going to be, because we know obviously our Wolverines have struggled. I guess you could say struggled early on in the season, but they had a 2-point loss to Virginia, 3-point loss or 4-point loss to Kentucky. in London. So it's going to be a good win on that resume, I think, late in the year for these Cavaliers. And, they have had a fairly easy schedule besides that Michigan game going into ACC play. But, I obviously talked about it. The ACC is going to be a crapshoot, it seems like at this point, with North Carolina being the heavy favorites, and they're pretty much not favored at all to win it just because of their struggles early on. Virginia might be that favorite team to win it. And I said it before the season, don't sleep on Virginia. They will have a good season. And here they are already in our rankings. Week 4 at number 3.
At number 2, we have the Texas Longhorns in a tight battle right now with Illinois. But I think even if they come out with a loss in that game, it's still a really good start to the season. Compounded with that Creighton win. I know they lost to Nebraska, but that's still 2 really good wins in their first 6 games. So already huge strides being made under Chris Beard. I said it last week, he's a top 5 coach in college basketball, and it's already showing with his time at Texas. If Marcus Carr can just be a little more consistent this year than he was last year, this is a dominant team, and I think they can make a really deep run in March. It does help that they got Tyrese Hunter as well to offset the bad nights that Marcus Carr will probably have.
And then at 1, we got Houston staying put for the second week in a row. They're absolutely obliterating North Florida right now by 24 at half. So that should be another win for them. Then they get Alabama at home, which should be probably, I would say, the best matchup of the year so far, which is very hard to say because there's been some really good games this year. But on paper, 2 defensive teams that it should be a low scoring, super low scoring game, but you never know with how Alabama and Houston can actually shoot the ball. Could be, one of those 80 to 79 games and just no defense is played as well. But you got to like what Kelvin Sampson has done with this program in the last 5 years. He's made them super relevant yet again. And, we saw it in 2020 when they made that run last year, when they almost made that run. And so this year, maybe this is the run that they can finally go to the championship game and get it done. I mean, what signs are you seeing right now than championship from this Houston team? There's no signs of slowing down at any point. They're still getting those close wins, but it doesn't feel like they're, really, oh my gosh, biting their fingernails, really having to squeak one out. They have controlled the game most of the time, and that's why they're here at number 1 and deserving so for the second straight week. But that's going to be it for our video this week. Make sure you guys come back next week to see where these teams rank and if anyone jumped into the rankings as well. And we will be doing our bracketology videos starting soon. So make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel to see what we think is going to go down come March. But until the next time, the Bench Buddies are out.